baby sits in her mother's lap, watching a tiny wooden stage. A red circle struggles to climb a hill. A yellow triangle appears and gently nudges it to the top. Then the scene resets, and this time, a blue square shoves the red circle back to the bottom. A researcher places both shapes in front of the baby and waits to see which one she'll reach for. She is 10 months old. She has never been told what kindness is. And she reaches, without hesitation, for the one that helped. Most of us carry an assumption so deep we have never once examined it, that a baby is a blank slate. That right and wrong are written onto a child slowly, from the outside, by parents, by punishment, by years of being told no. Strip all of that away, and what should be left is something morally empty, innocent only because it knows nothing yet. But the baby reaching for the helper had been taught none of that. And what she did in that small room is one of the most quietly unsettling findings in the entire science of the mind. The problem the researchers faced is harder than it sounds. How do you ask a question of someone who has no words? You cannot interview a 6-month-old. You cannot hand it a survey or ask it to explain itself. A baby gives you almost nothing: where it looks, how long it stares, what it reaches for. For decades, that was treated as a wall. You simply could not see inside a mind that young. And then a handful of scientists realized those tiny signals were not noise. They were a language, and they started to listen. In 2007, 3 psychologists at Yale University, Kiley Hamlin, Wynn, and Paul Bloom, published a study in the journal Nature with a deceptively flat title: Social Evaluation by Preverbal Infants. Preverbal, before language. Before a child could possibly absorb a lecture on how to treat people. They wanted to test something that sounds almost impossible to test: whether a human being can tell good from bad before anyone has taught them the difference. So they built the scene you just imagined. A small wooden character, they called it the climber, would try to struggle up a steep hill and keep sliding back over and over. Everything about the way it moved made it look like it wanted something, like it had a goal it kept failing to reach. Then a second character, the helper, would arrive from below and push it gently to the top. In another version, a third character, the hinderer, would come down from above and shove it back to the bottom. The babies watched this play out again and again until it was familiar. Then the experimenters set the helper and the hinderer down within arm's reach and did nothing but watch which one each baby wanted to hold. The results were not subtle. Among the 10-month-olds, 14 out of 16 reached for the helper. Among the 6-month-olds, the number was 12 out of 12. Every single one. Babies who could not talk, could not walk, could not have been coached or bribed or shaped by any moral lesson worth the name. And almost all of them looked at kindness and cruelty side by side and chose kindness. The team ran another version with a neutral character, one who neither helped nor hindered. The babies preferred the helper to the neutral one, and the neutral one to the hinderer. They were not simply drawn to nice, they were ranking the world. Good, then nothing, then bad. There was no slow warming to the idea, no confusion. The preference was there the first time they were asked. Now, your first instinct is probably the right one to have. Maybe the babies were not judging anyone. Maybe they just liked the shape that moved upward, or the color that ended up on top. Scientists had that exact suspicion, and they spent years trying to break the finding. And here is where the story turns stranger instead of simpler, because the same team went younger. In 2010, they ran a version of the experiment on 3-month-old infants, babies who can barely hold up their own heads. At that age, a baby cannot reliably reach for anything. So the researchers measured the one thing it still can do. Look. The logic is simple. A baby holds its gaze on what pulls at its attention, what draws it in, and what it cannot quite look away from. How long it looks, and at what, becomes the entire vocabulary. And here is what's fascinating. The 3-month-olds had already taken a side, but the shape of it revealed something darker than expected. Their reaction leaned less on attraction to the one who helped than on rejection of the one who harmed. The aversion to cruelty was the stronger, sharper signal of the two, and it was already running before the child could sit up on its own. But there is another layer to this, and it is the one that stays with you. In 2011, Hamlin and her colleagues published a follow-up in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. This time, they let babies and toddlers watch one character mistreat another, and then watch a third character either reward the wrongdoer or punish it. The children did not just prefer the gentle ones anymore. Given the choice, they leaned toward the character who punished the one that had done harm. They wanted to see cruelty answered. The instinct was not only be kind, it was the one who did wrong should not simply get away with it. That is not innocence. That is the rough shape of justice, appearing in a person who still wears a diaper. But here's the part almost nobody talks about. The finding has been fought over for nearly 20 years. Some scientists argued the babies were responding to low-level visual cues, bouncing, motion, which shape ended up where, and to nothing social at all. In 2020, one team set out to reproduce the original experiment, and could not. Only half of their infants reached for the helper. No better than a coin flip. But look closely, and that study had changed 3 things at once. They tested older babies, 15 months, not 6 and 10. They used an animated video instead of a live puppet show. And they used a different method to introduce the babies to the scene. Change the conditions enough, and the effect can wobble. That is not proof a baby is blank. It is a reminder of how fragile it is to put a question to someone who cannot answer you in words. What the researchers themselves arrived at, after all of it, was cautious but firm. Something is there before we teach it. The exact machinery is still argued over, the edges are still blurred. But a body of work now spread across many labs keeps returning to the same uncomfortable place. We do not hand a child its first sense of right and wrong. We find that sense already switched on, faintly, unevenly, in a mind that has barely begun to run. Paul Bloom, one of the 3 Yale researchers, spent the years afterward making the larger case that the raw materials of morality are not poured into us from the outside, but are part of the equipment we are born carrying. He laid it out in a book called Just Babies. It is worth being honest about why this unsettles people on every side. For some, it threatens the belief that we are born good, that a child is a pure thing the world slowly corrupts. For others, it threatens the opposite belief, that we arrive blank and equal, and that everything we become is built by circumstance alone. The babies do not fully confirm either story. They confirm only that the story begins earlier than we wanted to believe. So sit with what that means. The blank slate is a comforting idea. It tells us cruelty is always learned, that anyone who does harm was bent that way by the world, that underneath everything, we all began identical and empty. But the babies in those labs quietly suggest the opposite. We do not arrive as nothing. We arrive already leaning toward the one who lifts another up, away from the one who pushes another down, before a single word, a single rule, a single punishment has reached us. Everything the world does afterward, all the teaching and the wounding and the shaping, is laid on top of something that was already there. You were that baby once. Before you could name a single feeling, before you even understood that you were a person at all, you looked at kindness and cruelty set side by side. And some part of you, far too young to ever remember it, had already chosen which one to reach for.